The following research is part of the National Institute for Congestion Reduction funded by the United States Department of Transportation through the University Transportation Center program. Learn more at www.nicr.usf.edu.
Welcome to Out of My Lane, a podcast of the Center for Urban Transportation Research at the University of South Florida in Tampa. I'm Wayne Garcia, your host. This podcast is devoted to making your ability to get from point A to point B just a little bit easier. And we do that by talking to the folks who spend all of their working time trying to come up with answers to that complex transportation puzzle. This episode is titled Micromobility. Our guest today is Jackman. He is from the USF CUTR, and we're going to talk about his work as part of the National Institute for Congestion Reduction, or NICR, which is administered right here at the University of South Florida at the Center for Urban Transportation Research. Jason is a senior research associate with USF, and he works in the ITS Traffic Operations and Safety division there. He's a USF graduate, go Bulls, with a master's in public administration and a BA in technical and professional writing. He's expert in pedestrian and bicycle safety, outreach education, policy analysis, communications, and program management. He's got quite a resume. He is a league cycling instructor with the League of America Bicyclists, a board member with Bike Florida, and the faculty advisor for the Bicycle Club here at USF. Jason, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we like to start off every episode with asking our guests, hey, what's your daily commute like? When you do commute, because some of us are still hybrid and working a little bit from home and working a little bit from the office. When you do commute, what is that like?
It changes. It depends which day. I was thinking about this biking home from work the other day, what my footprint has been to USF the past 20 years. When I was an undergrad, I would bike and bike to school, bike back to school. And my main reason for biking back then is because I didn't want to pay for parking, and B, I wanted to save gas, even though it was very minimal to what today's standards are. Today, my commute's a lot different. I have 3 kids, and I always have someone carpooling with me. One of my kids goes to the daycare on campus, actually, which is very convenient.
Nice.
And there are days when I can commute by bike when I'm not driving him to daycare. And that's been going on for past 12 years. So I have had a constant companion in the car for carpooling wherever I'm going. But I've always found a way to get to University of South Florida by other modes, whether it's transit, the HART bus station near where I live, riding my bike, even on scooter. So it's funny because I'll drive to work sometimes. I'll have my e-scooter in my office and ride over to whichever department I need to get to by e-scooter. Walking's good too, but I remember that's just my nature, where I'll just, go on an adventure. For example, when I was an undergrad, I would not only bike, I would bike to the park and ride lots on campus and take the bull runner to classes, which doesn't make any sense because I could probably get there by bike, but
you take the bike directly there.
Exactly. But in my mind, I was like, I'm taking transit too. And it's funny because it's like, you're exactly right. I could walk there too, straight across campus, but I just enjoyed it. I just enjoyed the adventure, and I had the time before class. I had the time, not after class. I had to rush home to get to work. But I multimodal, getting to campus always. And that's just the way it's been for me.
And it's so interesting and it's a little daunting. And I know a lot of the work that y'all do with your outreach and the research projects is to try to get people more familiar with and comfortable with all of the different modes, so they're not thinking that my only choice, and for many people it is, but that their only choice is to sit in traffic in an automobile all by themselves. So let's start with our topic is micromobility. What does that encompass?
Yeah, micromobility is just the idea of e-scooters, bikes, bike sharing. You've seen the one-wheel scooters too, the hoverboards. Anything smaller than a motor vehicle is, in my book, considered micromobility. And the thought of, hey, how can we get people out of the car and using these other modes of transportation as, a way to get to places from A to B. So that's the idea of micromobility to me, where you do have to think about, well, they're out of a car. How are we going to get there by these other vehicles?
So I know some of the people listening are going to say, those are great, fun toys. I really love them. But do they really have an impact on transportation and the transportation system? But they do, right? I mean, they're not only part of the puzzle, but it's something you have to plan for. In other words, if you want more people to take a bike to work or to school, you have to have the infrastructure for that. So how does that all come together in terms of transportation research?
I think it's, especially with micromobility, even riding a bike, it's somewhat of a trend. You're more likely to do it if you see more people doing it, as opposed to just one person. You've been in your car and you see that one person riding, go, oh, there's that one person I see every day. Well, what happens if it's 10 or 15 people? It becomes more of this, hey, maybe I should do that. And I definitely would attest to that. I think there's a little bit of that encouragement subconsciously going on in your brain where you want to try something else besides being in a car, being behind a wheel or being a passenger. But I do think, especially with maybe the next generation, maybe they're looking at that as I can do that. I can get out of a car, or I don't need a car. I'd rather have my phone. I'd rather have a bike and a phone. That's it. That's all I need. I can see that happening. I see that as a big change too. And micromobility does play a big part because it does look cool. And, especially e-scooters, e-bikes, it's fun.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I see them all over. And I realize, there are people, I see them and they're clearly not just either in Ybor or downtown on a Friday or Saturday night, but they're using them to get somewhere, whether it's shopping for food or whether it's going to work or any of those kind of things. How do you put micromobility into that big mix? Is there a way to quantify it? Is there a healthy mix, or is it situational on where we live?
Oh, yeah. I think there's somewhat of a healthy mix of using the different modes of transportation, but it could be situational. It could be financial. Financially, are you going to rent an e-bike or an e-scooter every day to get to work, or are you just going to buy one and maybe cut that cost and realize, hey, this is my main mode of transportation, and maybe not driving a car or owning a car? So it's all of the above. I think it just depends where you're at in life, what your options are. And one thing I love promoting, not only to my family, because I have 2 older girls who love riding their bike, and I've talked to them about this all the time. I go, know your options. Know your options. Riding a bike, driving a car, you got to get there. So you got to remember, you got to find a way eventually.
So how much education and outreach has to go into that change? Because there's a whole component of planning, and you need bike lanes and you need safe sidewalks to walk and those kind of things. But leaving that aside for now, behaviorally, I know a couple years back you were involved with safe routes to school, or routes to school, take your choice out there. And looking at, getting kids to school in a safer way, and maybe knocking down that really long line of people in their cars waiting to pick up, Johnny or Jilly. How did that program go?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would call it safe routes to school. I think it's a northern thing to call it routes. That just drives me crazy. But that's, those are our future commuters. And I worked on a program called Safe Routes to School with the local school districts in Tampa. And it was getting kids and families out of the car and walking and biking to school if they lived within that 2-mile radius of the school, where the infrastructure's there, everything's running smoothly, and as far as infrastructure, and you can promote walking and biking as a great option to get to school and reduce that car line, promoting health and safety all at the same time, providing that next generation with active transportation, getting something to think about, again, our future commuters. As far as, micromobility and the future of promoting this and outreach, it does market itself in a way with, you have the urban, like downtown Tampa, where they have bike share and e-scooters. It does kind of market itself, and it becomes like this really fun thing to do. And with transportation and safety, there's this thing called safety in numbers, where, people may feel more vulnerable riding on the road by themselves, but when you're riding in a group, when there's more people out, drivers are more aware. And I think that has a lot to do with the success of the e-scooter programs nationwide, because people see that it looks fun. They're kind of fast, but it's a different thing. It's a really different transportation mode, and everybody's really excited about it. There's a big buzz about it.
Yeah, and there's just this big generational shift. Even starting with the start of millennials down through now Gen Z and whatever gen we're in right now, this total familiarity and use of, scooter sharing, ride sharing, Ubers, Lyfts, whatever. How much of that is going to account for trips on the road? Like, is there a way to quantify it? Is it like, have we seen data where that's growing? It's actually increasing, or is the car still king of the road?
I guess it depends which city you live in as far as motor vehicle is concerned and king of the road. Transit is the best option when it comes to reducing vehicles driven on the road. And that's one thing, we try to look at as, safety advocates and multimodal advocates, I guess, is, hey, get on the transit. It's right there. You're going to save money. Don't pay for maybe insurance and gas. It's a good option. But as far as like the ride shares, I did see a recent study where there are more cars on the road because of ride share. But there's some downsides and there's upsides to it, where less people are on the roads and maybe taking a ride share home if they've gone to a bar or something. It's providing easier options for people who may have made bad decisions to get home after being inebriated. I don't know.
Yeah. And, I was thinking, well, that's a nice side benefit. It doesn't really deal with transportation, but it does, because if you wreck your car driving home drunk, you're going to mess up the transportation system. We're trying, through all of these things we're talking about, and y'all are researching, we're trying to find both safety and efficiency, sort of to find the maximum level of both of those in the way that we move our bodies around.
Yeah. And everything is online in the cloud. And when it comes to our transportation system, it's so connected, so well connected, that everything's planned out for you. You don't have to go far. You don't have to go to the yellow pages anymore and find a taxi. You don't. You can go to your phone and you can download an app and it's there. You can find an e-scooter or a bike share right on your app. You can connect with friends on your app. Everything's a lot easier. You don't have to go to a payphone anymore. Hey, I need a ride home. There's a program actually called an emergency ride home. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's basically, if you have different commuting options to work or school, emergency ride home will provide you a ride home in case of emergency. So if you bike every day and you need to get home for an emergency, there's an emergency ride home program for it. So that's a local program too. There's so many different options, but that's just one thing that may shift that culture.
That help encourage
it.
So most recently, you've been working on a program that is part of the Nicer Grants, and that is TBCAT. Tell us about TBCAT. What is that?
Yeah, TBCAT, Tampa Bay Citizens Academy on Transportation. TBCAT had a really nice spin to it, kind of like that Tiger King, TBCATs, but but yeah, it was basically a program set to encourage and educate citizens on transportation as a whole, whether it's how transportation systems are funded, especially locally in the Tampa Bay area, how they're funded, how they're planned, how they forecast the planning for transportation, you name it, advocacy. There's so many segments we had, and we had about 28 students in the class each week. It was an 8-week course. They came back each and every week to listen to our guest speakers that we'd have. Excellent speakers. We had the top speakers in the transportation field. So I was kind of giddy about it too. I was like, whoa, we got this person. This is awesome. So I was excited about it too. And one of the responses, or many of the responses we got, were this course really helped me learn about how the transportation system's set up, how everything works, because you don't get this in the general public a lot of the times. So we provided through the TBCAT program kind of a platform where they can just, citizens can listen and learn and ask questions. That was the big part. Like, we want to ask questions. Okay, ask questions. Here are the experts. So it's a good opportunity for that. And we're looking at doing a phase 2 actually coming up. So finding new citizens to participate. And again, it's a very exciting program for that. And, we talked about the different transportation technologies that are out there. We had a transit segment. So you name it. It really encompassed all transportation and provided a lot of answers for the public.
Why is it important that the tax-paying public, especially, understands transportation? I guess in the old days, it seemed like a simple thing to understand. There's a road, but we had bikes. I walked to school as a kid. Of course, that's long ago. That level of lack of understanding, what does that create as a hurdle to trying to fix our transportation systems?
One of the issues I've found growing up in the Tampa Bay area is that I did rely on bikes growing up, riding places, but I never experienced transit. Never. I grew up in the Northdale area, didn't have transit over there. So when you get older and you're like, well, I've never ridden a bus before, you're like, okay, I want to see what that's about. And a lot of times it was very suburban. That's where I grew up, in the suburbs. So, that's you drive everywhere. I was fortunate to have some connectivity with my neighborhoods and local shops. So I'd bike everywhere. I was always on my bike. I think having those different transportation options are necessary and very needed in all our communities. And one thing that the TBCAT course provides is just that knowledge, that awareness of what's out there, and how local municipalities, how city officials respond to the public's questions on, hey, how does transportation work? What are we doing in our community? There was a question about a sidewalk gap, or there was a lot of good discussion on that, and what has to go in place to get a sidewalk installed. And that's the information that you don't typically hear on the public side.
Yeah, I spent a lot of my career sitting through city council meetings, county commission meetings, and talking to capital improvements projects and department heads and so forth. And it's amazing the amount of work that has to go into, fixing even the smallest problem, even a short gap in a sidewalk on the way to a school. And this happens all the time, especially in lower income neighborhoods that maybe didn't for some years get their share of the pie of those construction dollars. That makes it impossible or very dangerous for children to walk, even with parental supervision, to school. And so there's a lot of moving pieces of this. When we look at that micromobility piece and all of these things, what kind of feedback do you get from people using them, from transportation advocates, and from your citizens, attendees? What are they saying back about their acceptance of these micro-mobile sources?
Well, one thing I'll jump into is the advocacy part. TBCAT provided a segment for our 8 weeks of the course on advocacy. And, if you do have issues with transportation, or you do have questions, or you do want to get more involved, it's not going to be done just by anyway. Everyone has to get involved. Everyone has to be an advocate, especially if you're passionate about it. And I think we had a really good presenters on advocacy, and it really taught the citizens in the class that it's important to go to public meetings. It's important to, if you have a question, go to these public meetings and let your voice be heard. That's a big part of it. Now, as far as concerns for maybe any other transportation like micromobility, I did work on a project for an e-scooter evaluation, and we did in surveys for users and non-users. So it varied as far as those responses, and the users of micromobility or e-scooters would feel like what was safe was different, is a different perspective for what was unsafe for non-users. So if you haven't experienced maybe an e-scooter or a bike share program, you have a different perspective on that basically than opposed to a non-user.
Yeah. So what's next in the world of micromobility? What do we need to figure out? What do we need to research more? What's on the horizon for you and the others at CUTR who are concerned with all of these different forms of transportation that we call micromobility?
I think what's next for micromobility is a look at the infrastructure, especially in the urban setting, the equity portion of it. How can we disperse and place these e-scooter sharing programs everywhere we can for all users? But I would say the infrastructure part is a big key to micromobility. As we mentioned before, that some people may have issues with e-scooters, and that's true. I mean, there's a lot of them, and sometimes they're riding on the sidewalks, and maybe there's some new policies and ordinances where you can't ride on the sidewalks anymore, and you have to ride in the bike lane. So I think that's the future, in providing maybe micromobility specific infrastructure, as opposed to just having it just a bike infrastructure. Maybe there's a side infrastructure for just micromobility, or just that'll accommodate micromobility. So I think cities are looking into that, the urban districts are looking into that, and how they can accommodate micromobility a little more.
Yeah, the technological advances always outpace the regulations for them. And so, anytime something like that's adopted, like the scooter thing, there was huge problems with people, getting run off of sidewalks and hit and so forth and so on. And again, just demonstrating how complex all the moving pieces of a transportation system are, because it's not just the vehicle, if we want to call it that. It's all these other pieces. So at the end of the day, how long do you think it is in Tampa Bay? Let's talk about Tampa Bay specifically. How far are we away from having sort of a really fully realized micro-mobile society here, where you can safely bike and safely scooter and safely walk on a sidewalk and go to school, and if appropriate and you live nearby, work? Are we talking a long time out? Are we talking 10 years out?
Wow. I will start with saying that the TBCAT program, we had a really good segment, a field trip segment. We all took a field trip to downtown Tampa. So this is about a year and a half into the pandemic, and we're like, okay, can we all meet now? Is this okay? And we all met downtown Tampa, and I hadn't been there in a year and a half. And if you haven't been there in a year and a half, and this was about 2021, a lot has changed. You had Water Street, and it's a gridded pattern with the downtown. It's not so much, hey, let's make a left here, and I think there's a right here, and we can get to the interstate here. It's very gridded area where you have intersections, you have these blocks where you can walk, and skyscrapers now all over the place, and you're like, which city am I in?
That's how fast we've grown if you don't live in the Tampa Bay area.
and the great thing is that it is now suitable for all modes of transportation, for micromobility. Not that it wasn't before, but now it just makes more sense. You have the cycle track that's downtown. You have better crosswalks. You have larger not larger intersections, but larger round bulb outs where it's a larger area for pedestrians to stand before they cross the street, and it's actually safer that way. So cars making right-hand turns
don't hit them.
Exactly. It's more pedestrian friendly. And as far as like the Tampa Bay area as a whole, I mean, it depends where you live. I know when I was working on the Safe Routes to School program, I try to reach every neighborhood in the Tampa Bay area. You know, every area is different. It's diverse. Everyone has their own issues with transportation, especially with the infrastructure. But I really think changes are on the way. You know, they're looking for bike shares within neighborhoods, or, you know, e-scooters within neighborhoods. But like I said, that market's shifting a little bit, as opposed to the maybe the sharing programs to the personally owned programs, where I own a personal e-scooter, and I use it all the time around the neighborhood if I need to go somewhere really quick. You know, it's quicker than a bicycle, believe it or not. But I do think the dynamics shifting. Our city and county and state are working together to really improve a multimodal system. So we're going to see improvements in transit, you know, bicycle facilities, pedestrian facilities, and really think about reducing the fatalities for the vulnerable road users, especially vulnerable road users, reducing fatalities and serious injuries. So there's a big push for that, because I think, you know, in my field, in the safety and outreach, it's important. It's important to tell the public, hey, we're making these changes. So we're kind of like this ecosystem of change, you know, within the transportation world.
So if you're living here in the Tampa Bay area, great examples of sort of this micromobility world, if you really want to see them. Downtown St. Pete, of course, there's a lot of things going on. But I would say go down to downtown Tampa's Riverwalk and take a look at how that's being used by lots of different types of mobility devices, and as well as legs. And 4 legs in some cases. If you're a dog person, there's actually 2 or 3 dog parks along the way on the Riverwalk. Yeah. And I know this because, of course, I'm a dog person. The other thing is, we'll end today with a challenge to everybody, and I know you'll agree with me. Take a bus in the area if you haven't. If you haven't used mass transit in the Tampa Bay area, there's the Pinellas system is extensive through the entire county over there, and of course Heartline in Hillsborough County. But I remember riding the bus back last time gas was $4 a gallon, and I said, hey, I'll take the bus up to campus. You know, it's not for everyone. If you need to get somewhere in 5 minutes, obviously that's not going to work for you, but it's a heck of an experience. It's interesting. You get to see the world a way that you don't get to see it just out the windows, because you're not driving, you're not paying attention, and they're really clean and well-run buses. I miss some of the routes that no longer exist because they used to go right up the end of my street in South Tampa. But that will be our challenge to you all today as the biggest bang for the buck. But secondarily, as Jason Jackman from CUTR has told us, think about those micromobility options as well. Jason, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. This is awesome.
And that's it for this episode of Out of My Lane, which was brought to you by the University of South Florida's Center for Urban Transportation Research through its participation in the National Institute for Congestion Reduction. We call it nicer. We'll see you next episode. Bye-bye.
The National Institute for Congestion Reduction, NICR, is a transportation research center focused on innovative congestion strategies. The center is composed of researchers from the University of South Florida, the University of California, Berkeley, Texas A&M University, and the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez, and funded by the United States Department of Transportation. For more information, please visit www.nicr.usf.edu.